thank you very much for coming out today. My name's Tom Parker. I'm the Policy Director for Terrorism, Counterterrorism and Human Rights at Amnesty International USA, and I've been asked to speak to you today about one of the cases that we're highlighting for Torture Awareness Month, and that is the case of a Canadian national, a Canadian telecommunications engineer called Maher Arar, who was detained by US immigration authorities while transiting New York's JFK airport on his way home to Canada from a family holiday. And he was plunged into a Kafkaesque nightmare of torture and abuse. In September 2002, he was traveling through JFK when he was pulled aside by US officials. Canadian police had generated a deeply flawed intelligence report based on a brief social encounter in Ottawa between Maher Arar and a person of interest to the Canadian authorities. The US accepted this report without question, and Arar's nightmare began. Despite his citizenship and his residency in Canada, Arar was handed over illegally to the Syrian government, a country whose human rights record the United States has routinely condemned. He was held for 374 days before he was finally released and turned home. This is how he described his ordeal. In Syria, I was put in a dark underground cell that was more like a grave. It was 3 feet wide and 6 feet deep and 7 feet high. Life in that cell was hell. I spent 10 months and 10 days in that grave. During the early days of my detention, I was interrogated and physically tortured. I was beaten with an electric cable and threatened with a metal chair, the tire and electric shocks. I was forced to falsely confess that I had been to Afghanistan. When I was not being beaten, I was put in a waiting room so that I could hear the screams of other victims. The cries of the women haunt me most. The United States has made no attempt to defend or justify what it did to Maher Arar. The then Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, acknowledged before Congress that his case had not been handled the way it should have been. But there has been no apology or no effort of compensation from the Bush administration or the Obama administration. Indeed, Maher Arar today remains on the US no-fly list, and he's still excluded from setting foot on US soil, despite the fact that the Canadian government held a full inquiry which exonerated him completely and awarded him 10 million Canadian dollars in damages. The ongoing taint of apparent US suspicions not just prevents him from going to the United States, it prevents him from traveling to many countries around the world that use US intelligence for their own purposes to protect their own borders. Maher Arar tried to restore his good name by seeking redress in the American courts, but his case was frustrated first by the Bush administration and then by the Obama administration, both administrations invoking the state secret's privilege to get the suit dismissed. Arar appealed, but in June 2010, the Supreme Court declined to take up the case, effectively exhausting his legal options. The Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals ruling that national security concerns protected U.S. officials from being held accountable for the brutalization of a fellow human being held on the flimsiest of pretexts stands today as U.S. law. Arar is not the only individual to see his efforts to hold the government accountable come to nothing in the U.S. courts. In fact, every other single attempt to do this has failed. Last month, the Supreme Court refused to hear arguments of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals after the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals agreed to allow the government to mount a state secret's privilege defense in the case of Mohammed versus Jefferson Data Plan. It was a company that actually provided jets that flew people back when they were being rendered to foreign countries. And this is despite the fact that we know pretty much everything we need to know about this case. All that information is in the public domain. Earlier in the month, we had the Obama administration arguing before the Supreme Court to refuse to hear arguments in the case of Salah versus Titan, a class action suit brought by more than 250 Iraqi plaintiffs against the Titan Corporation and Khaki International, who supplied interpreters to support military interrogations. The plaintiffs in these cases claim that these contractors participated in acts of torture and other illegal contact in the notorious Abu Ghraib detention facility. And they're seeking compensation. Their attempts to seek compensation, the courts have been blocked. So we're in a situation where the courts have completely failed to act as a check on government abuses. The executive branch has lined up behind the previous administration. The legislative branch is the only remaining avenue left to gain some small measure of justice to the victims of the Extraordinary Rendition Program and of other Bush administration counterterrorism excesses. Congress has the power to authorize a formal apology and to arrange compensations for victims of US sanctioned abuse. This may sound like an impossible lift, but it is not. In October 2007, Maher Arar testified via video before a joint hearing of the House Judiciary and Foreign Affairs subcommittees on extraordinary rendition. 4 US representatives apologized to him for his ordeal at the hands of the US government. And that's a start. That is something we can actually build on. And so Amnesty has chosen to highlight Mahar's campaign as a bridgehead, as a way of getting the subject back into the public domain and getting people to take action and finally get the United States government to do the right thing. So we're calling on you today to join our campaign, the I Apologize campaign. Go to our website, sign on board, fill in one of these little aeroplanes, sign our big aeroplane over there, and call on the United States government to finally do the right thing in the case of Mahar. Thank you very much.